We'll be tackling the structural features of games, and this will be facilitated by Cecilia Pastor, Deputy Director General for Inspection. Good morning and welcome to this panel, Structural Characteristics of Games. Today we're going to be talking about product, about innovation, and about R&D. The online gambling market is undergoing constant transformations driven by a great investment in R&D. This sector operates in a highly competitive environment that is increasing in complexity, and the value chain has expanded significantly. Together with operators that are in charge of logics and mathematics, we also see many studios that focus on graphics and also aggregators. Aggregators that are companies that facilitate the integration between the different developers or coders and operators. And that way they facilitate that all technical aspects flow smoothly. Recently we heard news at KB Monitor that their global ecosystem includes 1,600 providers, 80,000 games, 5,000 operators that manage more than 40,000 websites. With these dazzling figures, we see a reflection of the great effort that has been put into product development and the diversity of competition. So in this highly competitive environment, operators have two great challenges. First, developing a good product, a product that is liked by end consumers, and second, they also need to place it in the market. And in order to place it in the market, to include in the large offer operators, this requires a digital marketing strategy, a sound one. They use KPIs such as retention, product adoption, RPU, ARPU, and once the product is placed in the market can operate. And the market very well filters information, and it generates the necessary signals that both the operator as well as the vendor need for their decision making, for their own economic calculations. And this is about revenue, and this is all about profitability. And here comes into play a potential conflict, because as we mentioned yesterday, in this activity 10% of gamblers support 80% of revenue, of income. So a successful product can also become a dangerous product, and hereby arises a conflict, a potential conflict. From the standpoint of the regulator or the certifier, those that need to validate those games, because you probably know that all games need to be subject to a previous authorization before they're put into production. So the standardization or certification procedures are administrative red tape procedures, and they're self-regulated. And what they do is to make sure that the different requirements laid down in the norm or the standard are met. And it's important that the different requirements that are in place to certify the products consider the good functioning of platforms, for instance, the well functioning of random numbers, the logic of games, safety, traceability of transactions. And then there is a set of requirements that do have to do with responsible gambling. And there is a resolution by the European Commission for gamblers or player protection, and it lays down a series of support tools: deposit limits, the right to self-exclude oneself, the right to have access to their historical information. So any new elements cannot be tackled through the certification procedure. So therein lies another challenge. Technological development will go on, competition will become more intense, and there are indeed risks on the table. And these are the different topics that we're going to be discussing: product, innovation, risk, and how we face up to these challenges. And in order to discuss this, we have invited César Perales. He's a doctor in philosophy. He has a chair in the Department for Experimental Psychology of the University of Granada, member of the editorial committee of addictive behaviors of the Academy of Studies, and he is also leading a study on behavioral addictions. We also have Guillermo Carrascal Bravo, who is a telecom engineer, and he also leads the technical office of the subdirectorate for inspection, that is in charge of technical requirements and oversight procedures. So we can now begin, and you can have the floor, José Juan. Thank you very much for your kind introduction and for the invitation. I am very much pleased with the way the Congress has been organized, so congratulations. And as Cecilia mentioned, we are going to discuss the differences between the different products. We're going to be talking about relative addictiveness, and we're going to also talk about the potential implication that this has for the adoption of public health policies and other policies. Before we begin, I'd like to disclose, to share my disclosures. I'm independent, and all the funding that I've received for my research has been done through public procedures, competitive procedures, so I have no conflict of interest in favor or against any of the industries involved or any of the agents or players or stakeholders involved in the activities that I'm going to be referring to. Now, to begin with, I'd like to refer to something that Miguel Arana said yesterday. Not all products are the same, and this is something that we've known for a very long time. Actually, the baseline piece of information that we base this on, this is a study that was done in Australia in 2024, and it reflects something that is very well known for us, that the proportion of players that have problems arising from their gambling activity is not the same with regards to the activity that they participate in. For instance, in lottery, we have a great number of people who play lottery, but there's a relatively small percentage of people that have problems linked to this activity. But in other less frequent activities, like for instance slot machines, we see that almost half, even though the total number of players is much lower, but almost half of them are gamblers that have some sort of problematic behavior related to their gambling behavior. So this goes to show that indeed the addictiveness or the danger that these games pose is different. And the problem with this data is that there's two factors that come into play here. We have addictiveness that can be attributed to the product as such, and the fact that no gambler plays one single game. There's a risk factor that is relevant, the number of games that you play. So the more games you play, the higher the risk you run of manifesting or developing a problem that is linked to your gambling activity. Therefore, it is very important that we try and discern how much is due to interaction with other activities and how much is due to interaction with one activity in particular. Now, a recent study was published in 2025 by Heather Wardle's group in the University of Glasgow, and what they tried to do is to isolate the effect that can be attributed to the different types of game per se. So these are uncorrected data. So this baseline data is very similar to what we displayed in the previous slide. This is drawn from a populational survey, the gambling survey for Great Britain, and we have basically the same results that we see in every single study of this kind. Slot machines, online casinos, and some betting modalities are the ones that concentrate a larger number of problem gamblers. What we see on the vertical axis here is a relative increase of risk linked to the practice of a specific, or linked to the use of a specific game. So that means that this 25 for bets or that 15 for slot slot machines, what they mean is that the relative risk of developing a behavior or a PGSI above 8 is 15 times higher, 15-fold in slot machine gamblers than the total amount of players that play any other game. That's a baseline. But if we exclude the effect of being engaged in several activities, the effects are smaller logically. But in the case of slot machines, in this case, they are ranked first. So that means indeed that slot machines are the type of game that has an increase of problem gamblers that is higher compared to others. So here we need to consider that there is no relative increase in risk. And in traditional lottery, for instance, you may note that traditional lottery doesn't increase the risk of us having a problem behavior per se, whereas other bets or slot machines multiply by 3 the risk of having problem gambling or pathological gambling. In this very same study, they analyzed the results of 2 different surveys. The second survey is the health survey for England. The characteristics are very similar. The activities that they evaluate are slightly different because we know that the way in which we categorize games are not always the same, but the outcomes are very similar. In this case, we see that slot machines present an increase in an increased potential of suffering problematic gambling, and we also see that other online games, chiefly online casino games, also are ranking amongst the first positions, and traditional lottery moves to the last position in terms of hazard or danger. So the conclusion is that the outcomes are very similar. Here we have a short list of studies that have been published recently. If you need to access the sources or the original data, these are generally public data that can be easily accessed. But you can regard this from a different standpoint. The relative danger of gambling or games of chance can also be analyzed based on the net revenue that comes from problem gambling in the different types of games. Here we have a recent study that was performed in parallel in France and in Quebec in Canada. And here you can see the percentage of net revenue coming from over gross revenue coming from problem gamblers. And here we can see that in Quebec, in slots machines, the percentage is close to 70%, and in many modalities, in both sides, they're above 40%. This creates an incentive. It doesn't mean that there's a harmful intention in the design of the product, but the fact that the product can trigger a more addictive behavior is there, and there's a relatively small number of gamblers, but their engagement, their expense, and the losses accumulated in this activity are sufficiently large to justify a great share of the revenue that comes from this gambling modes. In some, of course, pathological gamblers represent a very small percentage of the gross revenue coming from this activity, but there's other modes where most of the gross or a greater percentage of the gross revenue comes from these gamblers. Now, this is the international consensus and the subject matter, and this is the evidence that we use in academia based on studies that have been performed over the last 20 years. So these are very much established data. So there's sound evidence that shows that some products are more addictive than others, with slot machines and online casino games heading all rankings. And there is a clear relationship between addictiveness and revenue proportion coming from players or gamblers with detectable problems in games of chance. Now, second statement that I'd like to elaborate on. How much time do I have left? You're 8 minutes in, so I'm not doing that bad. I need to speed up, but maybe not overly. Okay, second statement that I think it's a bit controversial, and it has to do with the quality of the evidence that we have. And it also talks about the products being different based on the presence of different structural characteristics. It also speaks on the fact that their design characteristics or features are different. I was involved in this study. My participation or my contribution was modest, I must say this, but initially what we tried to do was to identify the structural features that add danger or addictiveness to a game, and we also wanted to develop a series of pictograms, information pictograms, so that gamblers could be informed of the features of this game. What was the objective? In addition to, of course, informing gamblers about the fact that they can lose money and the fact that the game can be addictive, we also wanted to inform them about the nature and the design of the product through pictograms that should be informative enough and transparent enough so that people could identify the presence of some structural features in the products that they were to use. So this was an international consensus work that included several dozens of researchers. We had a Delphi process in place to reach the consensus, and 10 main structural characteristics stem from the process. The first has to do with the speed and density of bets, the possibility of betting a lot and several times in a short period of time, and therefore the resolution of the bet is fast, and that enables the player to play almost immediately. The second feature is that in the bet you have very little time to think about the consequences of that bet. Then the third feature is that the game has some sort of controller or remote that can make you think that you can control the outcome of your bet. Fourth, that you can bet during the development of the bet, in-play betting. Also, withdrawal time. Also, the fifth feature is losses disguised as winnings, a positive feedback, near misses or near wins. These are events in which it seems like you were just about to win. If you get very close to the slot machine, you have two symbols, and if you had gotten the third, you would have won the prize. That you have the feeling that you almost won. It's a near miss, and this has a very powerful effect. Then also any kind of information that may cause the player to think that they have some sort of way to predict the outcome of the game. Also accessibility 24/7. Basically, this is online games that you can play using a portable device any time of the day. And then also, another feature is a message that can lead you to think that you are playing with free money, bonuses, promotions, etc., or that it's easy to win, or that the mathematical utility of the bet in terms of expected earnings is feasible. So these were the features that the group of experts agreed on as main features or characteristics. And once again, this is quite in line with several other studies that show that games are different from one another, not just in terms of danger or addictiveness, but also in their design. And this is based on the international consensus that underscores the main features and that also tries to inform consumers on the main features of this game. Something that is important to underscore too is that some of these features have also been implemented in types of games that in which they didn't exist before. This is a translation of a word in English, which is slotting.
Perdona. Esa idea de que muchas de estas características que no estaban presentes, en este caso en las apuestas de...
It's the idea that some features that weren't present, for instance, theoretical level. So there's, again, quite solid evidence that shows that some structural characteristics are more present in some games, and that some products, especially sports betting, has evolved to include some of these features. And the third point actually talks about the fact that both things are connected. We know that games are potentially dangerous. We know that their structural features are different, but we need to establish the link between how these features can influence the relative danger or addictiveness of these game modalities. And here we have another chart in which we asked a set of experts that were participating in the study, we asked them to arrange a series of games based on what they estimated was their estimated addictiveness level, based also on the structural features. And the result was this chart, from higher to lower. So these are expert consensus data. The ones that are ranking first are online casinos, and on the last position, we have the offline traditional lottery. And the rest of bars, not the first one, are the assessments of the different players. We can see that players generally are not very good at ranking the general addictiveness behind these products. But something that we see here is that when they're informed, they get a bit better. And when we use the pictograms that we displayed before to inform them about the presence of the structural characteristics on the products that they play, then there's a bit of a correction between the judgment of experts and the judgment of consumers as such. So this means that informing through these tools increases the awareness of players about the addictive potential of these products that can be attributed to their structural features. Why is this happening? I cannot elaborate on this too much because I'm running out of time, but something that we have been researching for quite a while is these psychological mechanisms that mobilize these aspects. And of course, this part is what interests us more. What lies behind our way of processing information so that these features have the effect that they have? There's a series of mechanisms. For instance, we know that some features also strengthen certain habits or establishing habits. Some trigger craving. Some features also increase the perception of usefulness or reward in an exaggerated way. They also strengthen some cognitive distortions or cognitive bias, and they interfere with the capacity to reflect. Guillermo is going to be talking about specific features, and there we will see how some of these features, such as visual keys, bonds, or rather bonuses, near misses, free bets, PDGs, elusive controls, overstimulation and speed, they trigger all these psychological mechanisms that I mentioned before. Therefore, there is a great consensus at the academic level between experts on the ranking of the danger that these products pose. This actually matches to a good extent the different data that we've seen before, the percentage of people that we know have problems related to the game modalities. And then there's also great theoretical agreement and quite a bit of evidence, experimental evidence through lab models on the fact that there are features that influence a series of behaviors, and this goes to explain why those features work in that way. What is there still to know? Because we still need to establish the link between those structural features and damage. Right now, we have an indirect link set through the type of product, but something that we still need to find out, and the second point is pretty much the first point. We still need to see how we arrange those features, not how we arrange games based on their hazard, but rather how we arrange those features based on their contribution to that danger level. Same way we can organize organize the games and the features. We need to organize all these features. Near misses are the same as volatility. We need to rank these features. So we still need to quantify that, and we need to quantify this through populational studies that are sufficiently powerful and with enough statistical power so that we can determine what their contribution is, their independent contribution. Now, we also need to do this because we know that these features have a different effect on different people. It's not the same to talk about a 19-year-old male with university studies than it is to talk about a 50-year-old housewife. They are socio-cultural and socio-democratic profiles and that are influenced differently by the different features. So we also need to still do that profiling so that we can actually understand the impact of structural characteristics, and we need to standardize our recommendations. They always ask the academia to provide evidence. Evidence for what? To do things, right? So what we need to do is to issue those recommendations and to create some sort of a best practice guide so that regulators can use it in order to understand the type of regulation that can be developed based on the nature and the exposure to products. So to conclude, prevention policies linked to games of chance must also regulate or should be measures to regulate the features of the product. This has to do with the nature of the product, and this is what evidence says. You may agree or not from the moral and ethical standpoint, but the evidence shows that this is a way forward. And the second prong, but not the only one, by the way, and that is important. The second prong would be to educate gamblers, not just about the importance of their individual responsibility, something that we also need to do, but also we need to educate them about the nature of the very product, and we need to create educational policies, training policies that actually aim at educating individuals. Actually, we have the author of this study here, and once again, I made a very small contribution. This study was led by Cristina Martín Pérez and Francisco Maras sat here on the first row. Maria also participated in one of the panels yesterday, and what they do in this study is to determine whether this way to approach prevention is superior to traditional prevention, which was based on asking people to stop if they have problems and convincing them that this is not profitable. I am not going to explain all these different charts because here this is a pre-post follow-up design based on a series of KPIs and indicators that show what happens before the prevention program, during the prevention program, and afterwards. A 1 month follow-up after finishing the program. And we see that the intention to play is low. We also see that the attitude towards the game becomes more negative. The severity of gambling issues also decreases. By the way, there were two conditions here. One was more traditional, one was more based on information, and the other one was also based on this novel approach, which is informing about the nature of the product, which was done in an interactive manner. And we see that the initial approach worked well, but the second approach also worked better. This way, we can inform potential consumers, and these were 18 players that were not minors, of course, and we see that this type of approach does work well. So that gives us hope about what the scientific consensus does say in terms of prevention, and it looks like it'll be the right way forward. And that would be me. Once again, I'd like to thank my group of researchers and my fellow colleagues at the University of Granada. And I'd like to thank the Center for My Knowledge and Research at Granada, because without them, none of what I do would make sense. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, José César y Guillermo Carrascal. Thank you very much. Now we give the floor to Guillermo Carrascal. Perfect. Thank you very much, Cecilia, for the introduction, and Julio César for his presentation. And good morning, everybody. As Cecilia was saying, at the technical department in the departure of gambling, we have the standardization on all and each one of the games that are offered in the online market in Spain. It gives us a broad perspective on the industry from the point of view of product. It's very much updated, detailed, and accurate. And my objective today is to share with you some of the characteristics that we're seeing that we think that are outstanding, and they should be analyzed to study the impact that they can have when developing a problematic behavior. My presentation is divided into two blocks: a very brief introduction in which I will share with you some figures, and we'll get into the main part of the presentation when I'll show you a catalog of examples of the structural characteristics of the games, and I'll finish with some conclusions. I'm going to get into the first part, and Cecilia said it, and I want to highlight this. If what we want to do is to study the design of the games, we have to put at the center the companies that do the design. This is the gambling software provider, and for you to have an idea of the market that we're talking about, although Cecilia has already shown some figures, in Spain we have 58 operators with a website where you can register, but we have identified 152 companies that develop software for this type of operators and are part of the standardized technical system of operators with license. If we concentrate on slot machines, as José César says, this is the most interesting game for problematic behaviors. We have 55 companies that have been certified to develop a slot machines, and when a gambler gets into a website, they're getting access to as many operators as companies that have reached agreement with them, and some operators work with up to 30 or 50 software providers. So when you get into that website, you get access to a large portfolio of games, to a lot of software. And for you to have an idea of the work that we're doing, we certified close to 3,000 different games per year. What I wanted to do is to show you this through a video where you can see what a gambler finds when they get into a gambling website. And take a look to the right hand side, a scroll line and the side, and how long does it take you to go down. This is the infinite scrolls when you're on the social media, when you're watching reels and so on. And this has been studied, and this is interesting to give you a visual idea of the very broad portfolio that you can find in any gambling website nowadays. And with this, we go into the main part of the presentation. I have divided this part into first, the essential elements of the games that define the logic of their operation, their development, that tells us about how the information is presented, what type of information is provided, the themes in it. So we go into this first part of essential elements, and when talking about the essential elements of the games, we have to talk about the return percentage, the amount of money that you can profit, the duration of the game or the spin, the way we interact with the games, and of course of the award, the different possible awards that we can have, the ranking of awards. One good starting point is the percentage of return. If you do not know anything about this world, it's very interesting to see how in most of these games the return percentage is in between 95-98%. Theoretically and mathematical, and this is so, and this has been certified and standardized. If you bet €1, the house will be winning in between 3 to 5 cents. This means that we need to implement gamification strategies to have more retention, and the margins that we are using is very, very small. And this leads me to talk about the second characteristic, which is relevant, which is the duration of the spin of the game. This is one of the essential aspects when studying the impact that it has when developing a problematic behavior. In Spain, the faster spins are slot machines, or that due to the regulation they are restricted to 3 seconds. I'm going to show you a small video where you see how it is perceived that the game lasts in Spain, that we are subject to this requirement, but in other jurisdictions, they can last up to a tenth of a second. This is the Spanish example, and this is example of other regulation where the duration of the game can be as short as you want it to be. And this leads me to how we interact with the game. Sometimes we interact in an automatic way. In these games of chance, you can play in an automatic mode with a limit of 1,000 spins. In some others, there is no limit at all. It can be infinite configuration, and at that speed, they make it easy for you to interact in a very simple way, in a very automatic way. And we don't only see these automatic spins or automatic games, but we see how with a single click you can facilitate multiple bets. The provider gives you the possibility on the bet creditor that allows the gambler previously to preset that with a single click you can do multiple bets. You can place multiple bets. Red odds, first dozen, multiple columns. They facilitate the way that you are placing the bets or the lucky bid. If the providers, if they say the 5 lucky dip, they choose 5 numbers. In one single click, I'm placing multiple bets. And I'll give you another video of example. The operator announces in the web that thanks to the user experience of using these touch screens, you can do multiple bets without putting up your finger. They said you can place multiple bets with your finger on the screen. This is a way of interacting in a very fast and simple way. And when we talk about the logic of the game and it's the volatility, it has high volatility when they have very big rewards that are given with very low frequency. In other cases, we have a smaller rewards, more frequent. And this, far from being not noticeable by the gambler, is very noticeable, and they can choose the volatility of the games that they want to play to and how volatile can they be. And we see that in the game, this is announced, the level of volatility. And one clear example of the volatility and how high volatility is something that gamblers like very much. We see this in the evolution that these type of games have suffered in the last year. In a conventional one, when you place a bet of €1, the more that you can win was €36. You bet to a number and you do it. And you see how some of these wheels or roulettes can end up giving you up to €10,000 per every euro that you bet. How can this be achieved? With €1 that you bet, you're going to get a reward at wonder in between 29 and 10,000. How likely is this for you to get this 10,000? You can have several multipliers. One first multiplier happens one every 123,000 times, and another one with a probability of 0.02. But it looks really shiny. You have the option of winning €10,000 by placing a bet of one single euro. And there is a second part. I would like to talk about how through software development we have these dynamic reels, these bonus games, these reels, these boosts, these potentiators. And there is a very clear message that I wanted to send out here. When we talk about slot machines, they come with these spinning wheels, but they do not simulate the physical world. The potentiality of the software is that it allows you to do or to come with multiple functionalities, and the game will behave according to the design. This is certified, but from the perspective of the gambler, it's impossible to understand all the things that are going on because they have dynamic matrix, the rolls move in multiple ways and with multiple technologies that are very well implemented, such as the mirror waves technology. With one single spin, you have 107,000 possible winning combinations. This cannot be noticed by any gambler. You cannot fully understand what you're doing. You're saying that many things are happening, but you don't fully understand what's going on. And we see that in order to achieve rewards, we sell boost inside the gamble. Activate your boost to have more possibilities to win. And this is very interesting because if you see the love certification, it tells you the game behaves exactly the same way with and without boost. So if you spend more money, you think that you are more likely to receive a reward. This is commercialized in a very attractive way, but this is not so. Also, we know the existence of jackpots in the game. This is interesting to study because they are talking about very high rewards, and we see daily jackpots, and it's more random to receive it depending on the time of the day. With this, I go into the third part of the presentation in which I talk about how the information is presented, and here we see multiple examples. This is an example that is known by all of us. In all roulettes, both face-to-face or presential and online, you always have information about the hot and cold numbers. This, from predictive purposes, is totally irrelevant. You're not going to have more possibilities of winning or losing, but this is an information that gives you a full perception or control or knowledge of the game. If we talk about skill perception, and these factors have been introduced by César, but a game like Aviator, this is a game that is relatively recent. It's been very successful, and all providers have ended up developing a similar game, a crash game, and you can place up to 2 simultaneous bets, and the price potentially increases the longer you spend. But if you withdraw before the aircraft crashes, you lose all the money. Maybe because of that need of the player withdrawing, you doing 2 parallel bets, placing 2 parallel bets with apparently a strategy. It's very successful among gambler because it generates this perception of you being skillful to win or not. We see the existence of different levels. They give you the perception that you're going up in levels, and you have the perception of you earning certain skills. Or this is a game of chance, is totally random, but the objective is for you to become a big stock market broker. I'm giving you all kinds of statistics so you can decide whether to place a bet in one sense or another. But this is information that is totally irrelevant from the point of view of the gamble. And Jose César has said it before, the phenomenon of the near misses, given a non-winning situation, the perception is that I almost won, and having the 2-7 and the only one was a near. I mean, this is not permitted in the Spanish regulation, and it cannot be done. Games are certified in this sense, but I would like to give you an example how through sound and visual effects we're representing this near miss. This is a game of chance. You're going to see 3 gambles, and we see this near miss through the sound or the music or whatever. We're going to see it.
Así es como se comporta el...
This is how the game behaves in a non-winning, and you're going to see a winning combination.
Especial atención en el zoom que hace el juego y en cómo se acelera la música, ¿no? Creo que, en fin.
Well, it's not a regular near miss in terms of the visual representation, but there are other ways of making you believe that you had that near miss or that near win, actually. And in terms of presenting losses camouflage as winnings, this is a game of chance that every time there is a non-winning combination, the alembic or this bottle increases the size and in a way that it activates a bonus, and all of the matches are winning and the losing ones are winning too, because at least we're filling in the bottle. And so this is an example of losses camouflage or presented as winning. And we see also these promotions: if you lose a minimum of 10 euros, you receive a free bonus. So there is a clear relationship between losing and reward. It is announced like this, and is there's relationship in the worst case scenario. Even if I'm losing, I'm winning. And this takes us to the fourth block that has a lower incidence in creating a problematic behavior. However, I thought that it was relevant to bring it here so that we can see how every public can find the product that best suits the states. With this very broad offer, it's difficult not to find something that meets your interest. If we talk about topics, we have TV shows, the show, for example, The Money Heist, where the money heist takes place, or themes that are similar to video games. You move to another kingdom, retro kind machines or slot machines or arcade games, TV programs, like How to Be a Millionaire, some that simulate a physical machine. A very interesting phenomenon in Spain because of the existence of provider having famous people or celebrities. We have multiple examples. I brought the one of Chiquito. This is a very well-known character here in Spain. It's a slot machine, the typical slot machine. However, in the bonus tracks, we see the protagonist in different locations and getting access to different rewards or prizes. And another interesting phenomenon is that although these are 100% software, in some of them they have a host. It's the person that is interacting with the players. Players can also interact with one another through a chat. So although this is a counterparty game that you do on your own, you create this type of community. You feel that you're interacting, you're having a host, you're having everything.
Gráficos realistas. Hay veces que recibimos.
And talking about technology, we see these realistic graphics. You will wonder, is it a software or this is a real person? We're seeing the software that simulate like this lottery with these balls coming out. The graphics are better and better. They're better than. And then we see the phenomenon of making things very theatrical is very interesting, because we said before that some games happen really fast. They're very immediate, but we see the opposite effect as well. Something that the game can show you in seconds is going to be shown with a host, with a theatrical presentation taking a certain amount of time. I'm going to show you a video later on that will show this very well. And also, if you gamble with virtual reality glasses, which is not happening very often now, but the user experience is more powerful and it might happen in the future. So I'm going to show you the video. We have cut it so we can make the best use of time, but it is a roulette, and when seeing the multiplier, the host open the red door that gives the name to the game, and they get access to an infinite room in a fantasy world. The game is 100% software. However, the host simulates the relevance of pressing a button that will activate the roulette, and the roulette will stop at the value that we give to the multiplier of the game. And this is another gambler playing with virtual reality glasses. This is the user experience. They're in the casino. They can see the different slot machines. They can get to one specific and in one bonus round, it can go into the deep sea, being between turtles and fishes, and you choose a barrel that is located at the bed of the ocean, and it comes with a prize. So technology increases users' experience. And I'm coming to the end of the presentation. Let's take a look at the last block of structural elements. I think it was important to talk about tournaments in games of chance. In this case, these are tournaments. The more you play in this game of chance, the more the points that you obtain, and you can see in real time the position that you're in within this ranking, and you see the prize that you can get access to. In this case, these were tournaments that promised 2 million euros per month and 2,000 euros or 10,000 euros per day. This was a study in our department, and we realized that they didn't identify that those prizes were being given to the gambler. The bases were very confusing. They were not totally clear, and we decided that it was not compliant with the regulation. That's why we asked the operators to adapt these tournaments to the regulation or to close them down. And the provider gets hold of the reins when developing the mechanisms, the promotions, and everything. But sometimes the operator don't fully understand what's going on, and for the regulator, it's also a challenge to get into the game, to understand how the price scheme is established, how they're being provided, and so on and so forth. So this is another case that I wanted to bring to you in the portfolio of examples that I've shown you here. And with this, I close the block and I finish with very brief conclusions so we can go into a Q&A session. So on one hand, if we want to study the design of the games, the provider needs to be at the very core. Yesterday, we spoke about having a good registry of providers in this regulatory proposition that is going to be taken to the parliament. Certification of the games is very mature. The labs have a very broad experience. The games work as they promise that they're going to be working, but we have to do a good risk evaluation or analysis, extending the analysis not only to the game, but all the things around the game, especially promotions or boosters and things like that. The challenge is to do things at the same speed as the industry evolves and extend this regulation for safe gambling, including measures that include the design of the games. With this, I conclude my presentation. We are the witness of an industry that is evolving at a very high speed. Technology gives them many options to improve the user experience, but the regulator has to find a good balance between all the virtues of gaming and the harms of it. Thank you very much.
A ver, tenemos algunas preguntas. Para el profesor.
We have several questions. One for Professor Perales. What effectiveness in risk behavior could have the warnings about the risk that are going to be included in a mandatory way on the websites, on the gambling websites? The answer comes with two different things. Quantitatively speaking, it's very small. It's small. We've seen this in other products such as alcohol, tobacco, etc. But if you do it correctly, it's very cost efficient because it's very easy to implement, very cheap to implement measure, and the reduction of the harm then can be attributed to a measure that is very easy to do. In general terms, is worthwhile. How much having dissuasory or deterrent images reduces the consumption of tobacco? Maybe only 1.2%. Only 1.2%, individually speaking, is hardly noticeable, but at the population level, reducing smoking by 1.2% is very important in terms of healthcare costs. So sometimes even small effects are important based on accumulation. So this is one of the situations. If the message is well designed, the warning is well designed, and the information that is provided is truthful and impactful enough as to reach the person that it is aimed to, even a small reduction can have an accumulated impact that is strong enough as to make it worthwhile. Because at the end, you're not going to adopt one single measure. It's the whole set of measures that you're going to adopt what matters. If each one of them have any comes with a small reduction, all of them together will amount to an important reduction. So let's not disregard modest measure because of a small quantitative result, because they all add up. We have another question to Guillermo that it is related with the recent approval, it only happened yesterday, of the proposal of creating a registry of providers. Will we have a license for these B2B providers? The registry, what it intends to do is to, as I said before, it is important to highlight the relevance of these corporations for the industry, and it is fundamental that they are going to be offering their games in the Spanish market. We know who they are, they need to have a representation in Spain, and if they're offering gambling in the regulated market, you're not offering another one in the illegal or non-regulated market. This is the main reason why we are creating this registry. It doesn't intend to be a change in the licensing model. The regulatory model is the one that we have. But it is also true that in our department, we've also worked not concentrating only in the operator, but we wanted to understand the technical system. You were talking about the aggregators, the studies. To understand the industry, we need to get in depth in the technical system, and we need to put a name to companies that are extremely relevant. So what we materialize through this regulatory change is that if you are a provider working in the Spanish market, you have to have your own entity, and you need to be enabled to a certain extent, and you are enabled by participating in this registry, and if you're out of this, you will pay some consequences. But this materialized something that we've done through other ways, getting in contact through the operators with the service providers of the system, and we did that since the beginning of the regulation. To finalize, I would like to get in depth in a topic that was mentioned, Professor José César, that I think is very relevant. When we do the risk analysis based on the structural characteristics, at the end you realize that there are different blocks of games, the slot machines or games of chance, and I don't know if it's possible to establish a risk category that goes from 0 to 10 in, I don't know, games of chance. I think it's complicated, but you have mentioned something that is very interesting, which is the relationship that exists between these characteristics and the individual vulnerability characteristics of the individual. Is there a way for us to, in a more clear way, face the problem? Well, these are two things. First of all, how we order the product irrespective of the label that we give it. We want to advance towards predictive models that will help us to estimate how dangerous a product is based on its characteristics. This is the ideal situation. And the statistical methodology and the mathematical methodology to do so exist. And the idea behind this is something that we're going to end up doing. We're in the embryo stage. This product comes with these characteristics, and based on these characteristics, we can rank it as more or less dangerous. At least we can have a reasonable estimation. How this information is used, I don't know. We're in a democracy where a risk estimation doesn't depend on scientists, but on the people that establish the rules and the standards. But the information can be provided, and as long as the information is reliable, how the information is used doesn't depend on us. The other part is the part of the adaptability, or the interaction between the characteristics of the product and the characteristics of the person, of the gambler. Guillermo has said something that is very important. Some characteristics are adaptable. Volatility is adaptable. So we know that products with high volatility are very attractive for young consumers with a strong cognitive bias, and low volatility products attract people with affective problems because they're more immersive. The more immersive the product, the easier that it can be used as a way of having an emotional escape. So different games attract different population segments because of their own psychological characteristics. Age is an important characteristic. And if the game is adaptable, the fact that the person can choose what is the most attractive element or how to adapt the game to their aspects that are more relevant for their behavior is something that's important, and this is already being used. The adaptability of the product to the individual, this is already being done from the perspective of the supply. We have to do it from the perspective of the demand, or we have to analyze it from the perspective of the demand. I agree with what he said. We concentrate in online casino and games of chance to study these type of aspects because they have all the characteristics, but it's true, it's very difficult, or I don't see a model in which we can end up saying this game within the segment or slot machines or online casino. It's complicated to say these games comes with more or less risk because it has many of the characteristics that we're talking about. And I agree with what Jose Cesar was saying. Games that a priori do not come with these characteristics, we see them evolve, and we see, for example, in sport bettings, how we introduce these components that are typical of slot machines, or extra components of randomness that are similar to the ones of a slot machine. So yeah, we're doing some segmentations, but it's complicated to see, or it's complicated to have a very quantitative methodology to give a weight to each one of the characteristics.
We have a challenge right there, and if you'd allow me, I'd like to share one final comment. We need to reinforce the idea that preventive training and preventive education is very important, especially for young adults. We need to inform about these features, features that act as small traps in a way, because they indeed capture the individual. So maybe that could be a takeaway message, or if you'd like to add to it. I think it's a fantastic conclusion. Nothing to add. Then thank you so very much, Jose Cesar and Guillermo, and I hope that you enjoyed this session.